I want to introduce, again, one of our early supporters and someone who's been active on economic development issues here in the state's largest county, and was one of the first people we went to because we knew she cared about really thinking about an economic development strategy that's much more inclusive, much more thoughtful, and we really appreciate her being a supporter. She's ending her 2 terms on the county commission, and thank her for all her service, and I'm sure she'll be doing good things next. So please welcome Bernalillo County Commissioner Debbie O'Malley.
Thank you, Eric, and good afternoon, everyone. So on behalf of Commissioner Barboa and myself, we're very pleased to participate and co-sponsor this really important symposium. As others have already said, sustainability means more than supporting green business or industry. It means also supporting, valuing workers and the communities that they live in. For some of you who maybe just be joining this particular session, Seed New Mexico hopes to build a network of small businesses who can learn from and share resources with others about sustainability, including learning how to incorporate sustainable and best practice within a business and policies that support sustainability throughout the economy. So we're proud to support their efforts and be part of hosting this and to advance that conversation. It's now my honor. I'm very pleased to introduce U.S. Representative Melanie Stansberry. Congresswoman Stansberry has dedicated her career to finding solutions to water issues, poverty, climate change, and representing New Mexico in the legislature and now in Congress. Congresswoman Stansberry worked in communities across the state as a STEM educator, researcher on land and water issues, and has served as former staffer to the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources and the White House Office of Management and Budget. As the Congresswoman from New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, she is working hard to lift up the voices of our communities and tackle our biggest challenges, from economic development to food and water security to climate change. I want to thank you for joining us today, Congresswoman Stansberry. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. It's wonderful to be here with you all, and what a beautiful Friday afternoon here in New Mexico. I want to start by thanking our amazing Commissioner for all of your advocacy, your community-based work, your work to lift up our communities, especially here in Bernalillo County and Albuquerque, especially down in the South Broadway and Barreles and our neighborhoods downtown. We so appreciate all of the incredible work you've done for years, and just so appreciate you. And many thanks also to Eric Griego. We know that this has been your life's passion, and you've served our state in so many different capacities. So I really want to thank you for putting this summit together today and for bringing us together to talk about such important issues for our community. And as many of the speakers have talked about today, I myself, as a native New Mexican as well, I was born in Farmington and I grew up here in Albuquerque in the North Valley and the West Side, have spent my life also working on these issues of asking these really important questions of how do we lift up our communities? How do we ensure they have a seat at the table in crafting their own future, and how we build an economy that really serves our working families and that enables our communities to live sustainably into the future, to continue the historic and traditional practices that are so deeply meaningful to our communities, our cultures, our languages, and who we are, but also to chart new economic futures that invest deeply in the well-being of our communities and in the education and prosperity and opportunities for our communities to really thrive. And that's the work that has motivated my lifelong work, now serving in our Congress, but the work that I've done working as a water resources professional throughout our state across my career, working as a science educator early in my career, and as a legislator and as a public servant working at the local and the federal levels. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit today about some of the work that we're currently doing at the federal level, but I want to take a moment to talk about why this work is so important to me, not just because of my professional background, but as somebody who grew up here in our communities. My own parents were working people. They were small business owners. They owned small mom and pop shops right here in Albuquerque. My mom ultimately started a sewing business. She was a seamstress her entire life. She had worked at the Levi's factory many years ago and then started her own small sewing business when I was a kid. And my sister's dad owned a small landscaping business installing sprinkler systems and irrigation systems across our beautiful city. And so I grew up in working families in the kind of mom and pop businesses that so many of our brilliant, resilient, amazing community members seek to start their own entrepreneurial enterprises, but which really struggle, I think, to find their footing and to access all the resources that might be available. And I think, like so many families in our community, even though my family were small business owners and employers and job creators, we also struggled to make ends meet. We struggled to figure out how to make a go sometimes. And we were fortunate that there were others in our community that were able to partner with and support us along the way. So for me, these issues are very deeply personal, and that's what's motivated my life's work around sustainable community development, and particularly my work around water, because water is life and water is at its basis the fundamental substance that everything depends on. And so that's why I've worked on water issues most of my career. So in terms of thinking about how do we take all of the work that all of you have been working on for many years, whether you're local leaders, your business people, activists, grassroots organizers, and really build a thriving, sustainable economy for New Mexico and for our communities. We have to acknowledge the moment that we're living in, which is this pandemic. Of course, we're meeting here by Zoom because of the pandemic, and to really recognize the disproportionate impacts that the pandemic has had, particularly in our communities of color, our low-income communities, and those who either through employment or their businesses have really suffered because of the impacts of the pandemic. And as we're thinking about rebuilding more thriving economies, how do we not only rebuild the infrastructure that existed, the economic infrastructure that existed before the pandemic, but to rebuild it in ways that invest in the well-being of our individual families, our entrepreneurs, and to build new economic opportunities that didn't exist before. And so I think we're at an inflection point in our communities, in our country, and in our global economy, and thinking about how do we build more thriving, more resilient, more just, more equitable economic opportunities today and headed into the future. And I think this is especially true here in New Mexico, where we have so many brilliant local leaders, people who are integrating all these different creative enterprises, traditional ways of life, agriculture, science and technology, the arts, community work into such creative and new ideas of how to really build up our communities. So in terms of what we've been doing at the federal level, and since I took office this last June as our Congresswoman, I want to talk about three major legislative initiatives that I think might be of interest to folks who are attending this conference. The first is the Thrive Act, and I know many of you are familiar with the Thrive Act, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. I want to talk a little bit about the bipartisan infrastructure bill that just passed this fall and the implementation that we've been doing to get those dollars on the ground. And I want to talk about the Build Back Better Act, which is currently sitting in the Senate, and which we are fighting to get out of the Senate because it will bring such transformational investments for New Mexico. So first, the Thrive Act. The Thrive Act is is a bill that was championed by our amazing Cabinet Secretary, Deb Haaland, before me. She was one of a number of legislators, Congress people nationally that was helping to champion this bill. We have a coalition, a Thrive Coalition here in New Mexico that has been working on championing this concept, but it's really a bold investment package that brings together the concepts of climate resilience, community empowerment, equity, and building jobs that really invest in the well-being and resilience of our communities. And so when I took office in June, I was proud to sign on to that bill and to be a champion of that bill, walking in the extraordinary footsteps of my predecessor and our now Secretary of Interior. Second, I want to talk a little bit about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. This morning, I had the opportunity to join our governor and the rest of our congressional delegation, along with mayors and county and local officials from all over the state, to talk about infrastructure and the huge investments that are headed to New Mexico. And so we passed a $1.7 trillion infrastructure bill in the fall in Congress, and the New Mexico State Legislature is about to embark on the 30-day legislative session starting next week. And because of oil and gas prices, New Mexico is seeing one of the largest single windfalls of state income our state has ever seen. And one of the major areas that the state is looking and investing in is in infrastructure. So we have the opportunity really of a generation to make huge investments in our infrastructure. And I think there are three areas that I really want to highlight for everyone here today in terms of opportunities. So of the funds that were appropriated at the federal level, we are likely to see hundreds of millions come to New Mexico as part of formula funding. It's funding that just will go to states based on different programs and formulas. But there's also hundreds of millions of dollars on the table for all kinds of other projects that we can competitively apply for. And the areas that I really want to highlight are broadband, access to water, our clean energy infrastructure and transportation, and also environmental cleanup, which is also not only important to the health and well-being of our communities, but also our economic future and job opportunities. So broadband, I think, is a no-brainer for everyone. We know that 1 in 10 New Mexicans do not have access to broadband. And when we think about the ways in which broadband is tied to the well-being of every single human, you know, I think this moment in our country is very similar to what happened in the early part of the 20th century as communities across the country got access to electricity. Broadband, internet infrastructure are fundamental to the well-being of our communities, whether that's starting businesses and connecting to the world economically, communicating with people in the ways that we are here, allowing our kids to do remote learning and access all kinds of educational resources, having information at our fingertips, and for rural and tribal areas in our state, also accessing healthcare, because we know this is one of the top issues that our communities face. And we can't talk about economic opportunity without talking about just the fundamental health and well-being of our people. And so extending access to broadband is crucial. This bipartisan infrastructure bill makes huge investments in the broadband infrastructure, but importantly in connectivity, because many families can't even afford to subscribe to an internet service. And so this bipartisan infrastructure bill invests in connection as well. And so it will help to subsidize the costs, monthly costs for people, especially low-income people, to access internet services. The second area I want to highlight is water. Water is life. There's no question that there is no more important substance that affects every aspect of our community's well-being. We have hundreds of communities across New Mexico where people are struggling to access dollars, infrastructure, and human capacity to address their water needs. And this is becoming increasingly crucial as our state is facing prolonged drought and climate change. I've worked on water issues my entire career, and in particular on these community-based questions of how do we ensure the long-term resilience of our communities, continue our traditional ways of life, protect the prior and paramount water rights of our tribes and pueblos and our historic communities, our acequias and our land grants, and how do we ensure that we have water to meet our basic life needs, our drinking water, our wastewater, our needs to grow food and to promote and enable our agriculture to thrive. So this investment that the infrastructure bill and our state legislature will make in water infrastructure is really crucial to our future. And our governor has appointed a new water resources coordinator who is such an incredible leader in the water world named Mike Hammond. And I'm really proud to have the opportunity to work with our governor and with our state to address these needs. On clean energy and climate change and environmental cleanup. The other thing that this bipartisan infrastructure bill does is make huge investments in upgrading our grid and helping to build the 21st century infrastructure for clean energy so that we can bring more clean energy on board and so that we can begin to transition our transportation infrastructure to more resilient infrastructure. So that includes electric car charging over the next several decades. Almost our entire car fleet across the country is going to transition to electric cars. Our car manufacturers are looking to do that. So we need to build the infrastructure to make that possible. And our communities have the opportunity to really capitalize on that now and build that infrastructure along with clean energy. The bill also includes a tremendous amount of money to clean up Superfund sites, to help address or abandon and orphan oil and gas wells, which have pockmarked so many of our rural areas and continue to be a source of pollution in our communities. And there's just a tremendous amount of money also in this infrastructure bill for forest management and sustainable livelihoods. So it's a very exciting bill. The opportunity is huge, but we have to make sure that we get those dollars on the ground and that we do so in partnership with the local leaders who really have the vision for a sustainable and resilient future for our state. Finally, I'll just talk for a moment about the Build Back Better Act. I am sure everyone on this call is familiar with it. As our president was taking office last year, he outlined his vision for the United States based on his campaign work and brought together all of these different voices and visions. And he outlined what ultimately became the infrastructure bill is the American Jobs Plan. And he outlined his vision for an American Families Plan. And it was to address the human infrastructure that we all know is so crucial to the well-being of our families and communities. So that includes extending universal childcare and pre-K educational opportunities, expanding our healthcare system, addressing the costs of drug prices, expanding Medicaid and Medicare so that everyone has access to care, especially in places where there's gaps in that care, addressing our behavioral health needs and our mental health across every sector of our communities, and addressing climate change. And the Build Back Better Act is especially crucial at this moment because it makes over $500 billion in investments in climate interventions. And this will represent the largest single investments in climate change our country has ever seen. Now, as our president went to Glasgow to the international climate negotiations, it was crucial that we show our commitment that we're going to get it done. And the House passed this bill out during the week after those international negotiations and after he came back from the G20, but has now languished and sat in the Senate for a couple of months. And I think we all know the kind of state of play that has occurred over the last several months. And what I want to say to you all today is that don't give up hope. As community organizers, as voices in our communities, we need to stay working to get those senators who are not currently on board with this bill back to the table, back to negotiating and actually engaged and willing to pass this bill out of the Senate, because this bill not only represents a huge opportunity, but it represents our best, and I believe in some ways last chance to really make meaningful action on climate change before it's too late. So we need to get the Build Back Better Act across the finish line. And we're lucky in New Mexico's delegation. We have 4 out of 5 of our delegation members are fighting every single day to get voting rights legislation passed, the Build Back Better Act passed, climate legislation. But we unfortunately do not have a large enough majority in Congress and the Senate to get it done without other members of the Senate at the table. And that's why we need our grassroots advocacy communities at the table fighting and elevating these issues, telling their stories every day. And that's why your work is also so important, not just in our community work, but also in our national advocacy. So finally, I just want to say it's so wonderful to be here with all of you guys today. I've worked with many of you across my career. I am so honored to work with so many of you on issues like climate justice, on sustainable economic development, and helping to bring resources and opportunities to bring our communities to the table, to let their own visions, ideas, creativity, and ideas for the future really shine and influence and shape the collective policymaking process that will help to build a brighter future for New Mexico. So I'm excited to see where this leads, and I look forward to listening to the conversation. And I will turn it back to you, Madam Commissioner.